Capitalism is over. So what comes next? Techno-feudalism. Now, if that sounds sinister, well, yeah, it should. Techno-feudalism describes an economy that is slowly regressing to medieval times, where we're becoming serfs tilling the digital land owned by our Silicon Valley feudal lords. And the end game of this project is replacing democratic governments with privatized and non-democratic digital spaces. One tech billionaire is already ahead of the curve in making this vision a reality.
This is what victory feels like.
I mean, come on, you had to see that one coming. Who was surprised with that? It's always him. It's always you, Elon. The world's richest man has been hard at work manifesting this dark new post-capitalist order. He announced his support for a German far-right party in an upcoming election and agreed with their leader that pro-Palestinian activists are basically Nazis. He accused the leader of the British Labour Party of covering up large-scale sex crimes and then argued that the US should liberate the UK. British friends, shout it out in the comments if you want me to come liberate you. I'll be on my way. And he's been acting like Trump's assistant regional manager, living in a $2,000 a night Mar-a-Lago bungalow and running a made-up government agency. Oh, and he's also using the social media platform that he owns to do hate speech. Now, it's easy to attribute this bizarre behavior to general billionaire megalomania. But that risks missing the point. All of his actions connect to the larger project of using digital space to subvert governments and command increasing control over our lives. Okay, so what is techno-feudalism, and how are folks like Musk using their influence to push not just the United States, but the entire world in this direction? Now, to understand, I first need to talk about feudalism, which is a pre-industrial system in which you were either born landed gentry, meaning that you owned land, or a serf, meaning that you worked the land. And because land was something you inherited, there was no way to climb the ladder from serfdom into gentry, no bootstraps in that world. There was no market price on the land. But with economic changes in the 19th century, land became a more valuable commodity on the emerging market. So landlords kicked the serfs out and invited them to come back and exchange their labor for money, creating whatever goods were desirable on the beautiful market. Now, this marked the creation of enclosures, in which peasants were kicked off the land their family had worked for generations, fenced out of their previous homes. They now worked for wages and had to pay rent. In other words, it was capitalism time. Now, while we're not moving back onto parcels of land owned by feudal lords, much of our lives is spent on apps and in other digital spaces that we do not own. If you do own a digital space, however, just consider signing up for our Patreon. There's a link in the description. We would love to take your money. Now, this often involves digital forms of enclosures, and we're creating value for the owners of these enclosures every time we read the news, catch up with friends, or order dinner. Techno-feudalism describes this cloud-based way of life where we've become serfs who live on the terrain of Silicon Valley billionaires. And much like the serfs before us, we don't really have a choice, as so much of modern existence requires use of these digital spaces. Like, really think about it. If you were gonna throw your phone away, get off the internet, not use apps, what would you do? A lot of stuff would be really hard. If you've done that, don't let us know, because you're not here, because you wouldn't be watching this. According to McManahan, Strachan, and Forno, techno-feudalism suggests our preferences are no longer our own. They're manufactured by machine networks. It's underpinned by the theory that the cloud has created a feedback loop that removes our agency. We train the algorithm to find what we like, and then the algorithm trains us to like what it offers. I don't know what this says, but I'm getting this Instagram ad recently that's like, how to be a good dad even if you have ADHD. And it's like, Jesus Christ, you're targeting me with a thing that's like, your specific neurodivergency is making you a bad dad, but you need to do this to be a good dad. It's crazy. So not only are we dependent on cloud-based networks, but the more we engage with them, the more we need them, and the more they sort of own us. Now, you might think that President Musk's recent political activity indicates a desire to use traditional systems of government to gain power, but it's actually the opposite. He's using the government to undermine the very power of government. Trump's even promised him his own government agency, DOGE, or Department of Government Efficiency, with the precise goal of eliminating wasteful government spending. And this plays into the recent trend in which governments are giving up more and more of their power to private tech contractors. This increasingly looks like previously public services, everything from transportation, the post office, libraries, education, becoming enclosed by private corporations. And this isn't an exclusively right-wing move, as the guy who really married big tech to government was none other than Barack Obama, because he hoped that we could change America to be a Silicon Valley hellhole. Lucy Green writes that there was a revolving door between the Obama administration and tech giants. A host of ex-Obama staffers went on to work for Lyft and other Silicon Valley giants, with some helping craft legislation that basically favors digital landlords while taking rights from the new serfs. In other words, it gives like companies a lot of power and makes it where if you're a Lyft driver, you don't have real labor rights. It's established an incestuous relationship between government power and tech influence. Green writes that Silicon Valley is now better positioned than most industries to wield political influence, and in ways we have not seen before. It is at once government vendor, collaborator, sponsor, advisor, communicator, rival, and enemy on any given day. More and more government contracts are going to Silicon Valley, especially in military and communications technology. Consider how NASA, rather than investing in its own R&D, now buys Musk's rockets and satellites. This turns the agency from something that is at least in theory about the public good into a mechanism for enriching Musk. According to Green, tech companies are exacerbating all the pressures on the government, which is both eroding revenues and undermining their strength. And Yanis Varoufakis notes that as with the original enclosures, some form of fence would be necessary to keep the masses out of such an important resource. In the 18th century, it was land that many were denied access to. In the 21st century, it is access to our own identity. This is because just to participate in this new cloud-based kingdom, we're constantly trading our identity and personal data for admission. This data is collected whether you're driving your Tesla or you're posting on the app formerly known as Twitter. And then you're fed ads that imply that if you have ADHD, you can't be a good dad. This means that Musk is completing a project that was initiated and endorsed by Obama and a whole bunch of liberal politicians. So don't say woke crack or anything, guys. I'm saying bad stuff about Obama and those guys, but then you'll just be mad at that. You guys are hard to please. But Musk is going beyond simply trying to make America Silicon Valley again. He's trying to take this project global. It's not dissimilar from the pre-industrial land grabs and expansions that would expand the territories of feudal lords to give them more power and control. France's president recently said this about Musk. 10 years ago, who would have imagined that the owner of one of the world's largest social networks would be supporting a new international reactionary movement and intervening directly in elections, including in Germany? He was joined by Norway's prime minister, who said, "I find it worrying that a man with enormous access to social media and huge economic resources involves himself so directly in the internal affairs of other countries." Sort of like the unmarried friend who gives you like marriage advice, or the person without a kid that tells you how to parent. It's like, just chill. Just chill. It's not your role. Musk has been a major power player in the Russian-Ukraine war via his Starlink satellites, which Ukraine relies on, and which literally give him the power to undermine their war efforts. In recent months, the most alarming part of Musk's European tour of terror has been his support for the far-right Alternative for Germany party. He recently warned the German people,
"Only AfD can save Germany. End of story." And people really need to get behind the AfD, and otherwise things are going to get very much worse in Germany.
Okay, let's take a quick look at this article. It's titled, "Musk Says Only AfD Can Save Germany and Talk with German Populist Leader." And if you just read this headline alone and knew nothing else, you might be like, oh, the AfD, that's probably a political party. Populism, that's just someone who claims to appeal to ordinary people. Surely nothing crazy is going on here. But if you were looking at a headline from a different source covering this same story, you could read something like, "Elon Musk to host X event promoting neo-Nazi AfD party ahead of German elections," and think, oh, that's a bad one. And how is it possible that the same story is completely different depending on which source you're getting your news from? Many media organizations, well, they prioritize clicks over clear, accurate information. They're reducing complex issues to simple sound bites. That article that I just shared, well, I found that on Ground News, which is where I read my news every day. They're the sponsor of today's video. Their app and website pull stories from across the globe into one place, and it gives you the full picture on every story. This story has been reported by over 300 sources, and we can check out where each one leans politically using their bias distribution chart. You can also check the factuality rating, which scores the reliability of reporting, and even lets you see who owns each source. These factors shape how stories are framed, letting you compare how bias impacts coverage, like we saw in the articles mentioned earlier. Now, one of the things I love about Ground News is their blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately reported by either side of the political spectrum. I don't know about you all, I can get a little trapped in my bubble, following certain people on social media, talking to friends who have similar views as I do, and this feature really helps me step outside that bubble and both discover stories I wouldn't see otherwise, and also see how stories I know about are covered differently. Now, if you want to check it out for yourself, you can head over to ground.news/wisecrack and give it a try. If you use this link, you're going to get 40% off the Vantage plan and get unlimited access to all the features that are going to help you get all the information you need to navigate the news in this increasingly newsworthy time. Now, I think Ground News is doing important work. I do hope that you'll check them out. But for now, let's get back to the show. The party's leader, Alice Weidel, used their conversation to equate Hitler and the Nazis with contemporary communist and socialist, even though Hitler actually put communists into camps.
So he was nothing else than an anti-Semitic socialist.
Yeah.
And we are exactly the opposite. We are a libertarian conservative party. We are wrongly framed the entire time.
This isn't just more of Elon being oddly Nazi adjacent, it's an active continuation of the techno-feudalist project. And this was noted by the Green Party candidate from Germany, who said, with his billions upon billions of dollars and unbridled media power, Elon Musk's support for the AfD is not some ignorant whim. He's emboldening those who want to weaken Europe and its rule of law, the very regulations that limit unchecked power. Now, some of you Musk fanboys might argue that all he's doing is encouraging a more libertarian spirit and a sense of free speech absolutism. But according to political philosopher Willem David Blunt, Musk and co. aren't libertarian, they're authoritarian. They're primarily interested in shielding themselves from regulation. They're overlords, wanting to be free of constraint like feudal overlords of the past as divine right of kings. They view themselves arbitrarily as geniuses, and we are buying into it one click at a time, affirming their power. And it makes sense that Musk would work to destabilize Europe with its historical social safety nets and more aggressive regulation of tech companies, including the recent Digital Markets Act, which bars companies from monetizing data collected on mobile apps to help advertisers better target individuals. But you might still be wondering, how does any of this end capitalism? Well, let's think back to the transition from feudalism to industrialism, when the enclosure of land turned everything into market relations. The early open access and publicly funded internet was, over the course of the 90s, sold off for commercial interest, and eventually enclosed by tech companies that consolidated services to extract maximum data and profit from users. But now the shift to techno-feudalism has more to do with power and control than it does market viability. Now, according to Varoufakis, techno-feudalism is qualitatively distinct from capitalism, and thus, as a word, it illuminates crucial aspects of the real world in ways that rentier capitalism or platform capitalism or hyper-capitalism cannot. In other words, techno-feudalism breaks from the pure market logic that has driven most tech development until recently. And just like how some of Musk's seemingly erratic political behavior makes more sense in light of the techno-feudalist project, so does his own use of and general encouragement of hate speech. Now, Varoufakis writes, because techno-feudalism's algorithms are known to reinforce patriarchy, stereotypes, and pre-existing oppressions, those who are most vulnerable, girls, the mentally ill, the marginalized, and yes, the poor, suffer the outcome most. In other words, if recklessly using R words and N words and F words on social media reinforces the strength of these platforms, then hey, why not encourage it? And in case you're gonna be like, he did the R one, I'm not gonna say it, but he did it. We recently saw this with Mark Zuckerberg pulling diversity programs out of Meta, along with their content moderation program, which now allows for hate speech. And Zuckerberg has explicitly connected these moves with a renewed call for masculinity and aggression in corporate culture.
It's one thing to say we want to be kind of like welcoming and make a good environment for everyone. And I think it's another to basically say that masculinity is bad.
And it shouldn't shock us that folks like Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk, Mark Andreessen are all getting in line to serve in Trump's anti-woke army. Now, Varoufakis writes that bigotry is techno-feudalism's emotional compensation for the frustrations and anxieties we experience in relation to identity and focus. He notes that even the most diligent content moderation can't stem all this hate because algorithms optimize for cloud rents, which flow more copiously from hatred and discontent. It's good for business to do hateful stuff, so they're going to keep making it possible to do hateful stuff. Now, Varoufakis also points out that another effect of the techno-feudalist revolution is that we no longer own our own minds. During our working hours, we become cloud proles, putting ourselves into various digital systems. My main one is YouTube. What digital system do you put yourself into? And then when we get home, we become cloud serfs, fueling our own distraction and exploitation. When I'm at home, I still largely fuel YouTube, sometimes other streaming apps, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram. Why don't I read books? I don't know. Now, he writes that while privatization and private equity asset strip all physical wealth around us, cloud capital goes about the business of asset stripping our brains. Whew, take that one in, guys. cloud capital goes about the business of asset stripping our brains. Where we once both lived and worked on the feudal lord's physical land, the new serfdom takes place in the cloud controlled by the tech overlords, where our minds and very identities are extracted for value. Now, it might feel like we're totally screwed. At this point, that's how I feel. But, according to Varoufakis, the poison might also contain the cure. He writes that collective action is made harder when people have fewer opportunities to come together. But herein lies the great power the cloud capital presents to its potential rebels, a capacity to build coalitions, organize, and take action via the cloud. I guess that's what the comments are for. Get after it. So the very space that we're forced to work as both unpaid laborers and reproducers of the system is also a space where we can band together to rage against the machine. As Bernie Sanders pointed out in a recent interview with Hassan Piker, the techno-feudal takeover of politics disempowers working people as a whole and hollows out what remains of democracy.
You got control of the media by the few, control of the political system by the few, control of the economy by the few. And if that's not oligarchy, I don't know what oligarchy is.
So as Trump takes office, flanked on all sides by those with a clear techno-feudal agenda, the challenge is creatively using those feudal spaces to organize resistance against our new lords. Okay, please let me know what you think below. If you haven't checked it out yet, there is a link to our Patreon community in the description. It's a great way to support the channel, get early videos with no ads, extra perks, access to our Discord server, things of that nature. If you don't have that and you consider subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, it all really helps us. In the meantime, I don't know, try to be a little less surfy this week, and I'll do the same. I'll see you next time.